We're now joined from Sheffield by the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls. Welcome back to the Daily Politics, Mr. Balls. If you were heading for the Brussels summit this weekend, what would you be advising our European partners to do?
Well, I think there's three things you need. You need a plan, you need political agreement for that plan, and it's got to be a plan which works. And the problem is, none of those things are in place. There's not an agreed plan. The politics in the European Union and in the Eurozone is very divided. No decisions can be made. And I fear the danger is that the plan won't be the right plan. You've got to say to the European Central Bank, as governments, you've got to do whatever it takes to show that Italy and Spain will be supported by the collective in the Eurozone. The quid pro quo has got to be that in Italy there's got to be a clear political deficit reduction plan. The Germans are right to insist upon that. But you won't have stability unless you say collectively we're going to stand by each other in the Eurozone for now. And that means a very substantial commitment to inject billions and billions of pounds of resources if necessary. Without that, I'm afraid the markets will doubt whether or not there is a real political commitment to hold this together. That's where the contagion, the tensions, the low growth, the market worries come from. As I said, though, there's also got to be a commitment to a balanced plan. And if you try to go too quickly on austerity, as you see in Greece, it doesn't work. If you look at the British example as well, in Ireland, it's been, as we were just hearing, they've cut VAT recently temporarily. There's a debate now about moving to a more balanced plan. Even then, unemployment very high, markets not lending yet to Ireland. Navigating your way through this is very, very difficult. You've got to have a plan for growth and jobs, a credible deficit plan and political agreement to implement it. Without those three things, you can't make progress.
But the problem is that no one's following your advice. The Irish haven't followed your advice. They're cutting the deficit much more quickly than we're cutting ours. And the Germans and the French are also cutting their deficits. You seem to be a lone voice in your Keynesian stimulus proposals. No one else in Europe seems to want them.
The Irish government have just announced a temporary cut in VAT.
Yeah, but the deficit's going to be reduced more quickly.
And you were just hearing the Troika saying to the Irish, you may need to ease off and move to a more balanced plan, given this more dangerous world situation. What you've got to do is have a credible plan on the deficit. I've always agreed with that. But it's got to be one which works. And if you have flatlining growth, if unemployment's rising, what the markets then say is, look, it's not working, the debt's going to be going up rather than down, borrowing under pressure. If you look at Italy, their problem is that with the level of debts they've got, twice as high as ours, plus high interest rates, no growth means their debt gets worse. So you've got to have a growth and jobs plan alongside a credible deficit plan. If you say we're going to do it all through austerity, it doesn't work. And that has been part of the Eurozone problem. Of course, the other part, as I was saying a moment ago, is you've got to have a collective political commitment in the Eurozone. And until France and Germany can reach a deal, I have to say, David Cameron, in my view, should have been in Berlin and in Paris this week, saying to people, in Europe's interest, in Britain's interest too, get this sorted out. And instead, he's just stuck in an internal Conservative Party wrangle. This is so important.
He's heading for the European summit on Sunday, along with other European leaders. The problem is that you are a lone voice on this. Indeed, you're in isolation. Mrs. Merkel doesn't agree with your analysis. She wants to continue to cut the deficit at a high rate. Mr. Sarkozy doesn't. Even the French socialist candidate wants to cut the French deficit. Who agrees with you?
Well, so you're saying, Andrew, at the moment, when we see the chaos of a summit not reaching agreement, that I should be following the path being prescribed by Mrs. Merkel.
No, I'm just asking who agrees with you. I'm not saying you're wrong. You may be right. You alone in Europe may be right. It's happened before, I'm sure. I'm just wondering who agrees with you.
That would be quite a punt to take, Andrew. At the moment, the Eurozone...
I did say may.
The Eurozone is going into what is probably the biggest political crisis of our lifetimes. Economically, it is incredibly dangerous what they're doing. They can't sort it out. Austerity is not working. The ECB is neutered. There's no way of standing behind Italy, so you've got these huge contagion problems. In Britain, we've got a deficit plan, and we've got a political agreement to deliver it. Our problem is that it's the wrong plan because it's going too fast, and you just have to look at the evidence on unemployment or on growth. But the idea that you could look at the Eurozone and say Britain would be better following their plan, good grief, Andrew, I don't believe you think that for a moment.
That's what I didn't say. I asked a much simpler question that people can follow, and that is, it seems your position is that Ed Balls is right and everyone else is wrong. Mrs. Merkel doesn't agree with you. Mr. Sarkozy doesn't agree with you. Mr. Zapatero in Spain doesn't agree with you. The incoming likely Conservative government in Spain doesn't agree with you. The Irish don't agree with you. The French socialists don't agree with you. So I simply ask again, who does agree with you?
Look, we didn't join the euro, Andrew. What a good decision that was. Outside the euro.
I know, and you've taken the credit on this programme endlessly for that. I'm not arguing about that. I'm simply, it seems to me, you, as I say again, you may be right, you may be wrong, but you, as you sit there in Sheffield, are an isolated figure in the European debate.
Look, sometimes, Andrew, you have to have the strength to make an argument which is right and be outside the consensus.
OK.
A year ago, I said if we cut the deficit in Britain this fast, it would be bad for Britain. And the Conservative Party and many commentators said no, we'd get growth, unemployment would come down, borrowing would come down. What's happened? A year of flatlining, unemployment going up, markets now doubting whether Britain will get the growth we need. I have to say, increasingly, it looks as though those optimists of a year ago have got it wrong. And I'm saying now, in Britain, you've got to change course, and Europe's got to change course as well.
All right.
Austerity and a lack of political agreement is not working.
No, so let's, for the purposes of the rest of our short discussion, assume that Ed Balls is right and the rest of the world is wrong. So to capitalise on your wisdom, let me ask you on this. It would seem to me, and you're quite right about the failure of leadership in Europe, and this is going on, and they've kicked it into touch again. It would seem to many people that in the longer term, the only way for Europe to go is either to break up the Eurozone and kick out the weaker members, so you have what economists like you and me would call an optimal currency area in the north, or you have, as the British government is proposing, a much stronger fiscal union with transfer payments and a Eurozone economic policy. Which way would you go?
I think you cannot make a monetary union work without collective fiscal agreement. There's no doubt about that. That's the direction it has to go in. I personally think that you can make a larger monetary union work across an optimal currency area plus if you've got that political commitment. And the problem is, Italy is probably OK if it gets its deficit sorted out, but the others have got to stand by the Italians, and that's not working. So I'm for political integration, a step beyond on that, and I'm for, the things which need to be done to make that happen. The problem this weekend is that the French and German governments can't really quite face up to that. Our government is sitting in London, not doing the diplomacy that we should be doing, and it's going to end up with jobs and investment lost here in Britain, because what happens in the Eurozone really, really matters to Britain.
I understand that. But if you, like the government, are urging a deeper fiscal union for the Eurozone countries with massive transfer payments and an economic policy for the Eurozone, that by definition redefines our relationship with Europe. It would then change. We would face a 17-country bloc which would outvote us on every major issue. Wouldn't we then have to change our relationship if the logic of your policy and Mr. Osborne's policy was followed through?
Well, look, the logic of a monetary union is deeper fiscal integration. Of course, that means that changes over time, and Britain has to deal with that. The thing I find really worrying about the Conservative Party is they seem to think the only way to sort Europe out, or our relationship out with Europe, is essentially for Britain to walk away and to leave and to withdraw. That is so defeatist.
That's not Conservative government policy.
Well, it's the view of very many Conservative MPs who will be rebelling next week, and it's pretty much what George Osborne hints at and winks at when he's in the House of Commons. We should be leading the argument through reform in Europe, not walking away. The single market, financial services, the labour market, they matter across the whole euro area, the whole EU area, not just the Eurozone. Us not being in those debates is incredibly dangerous.
All right. Stay with us just for a second, Mr. Balls. We're running out of time, but let me get some reaction here from our guest. Janesh, what do you... If we are urging the Europeans to do what we wouldn't do ourselves, doesn't that change our relationship over time with Europe?
Yeah, and I think a 17-country core Eurozone area would effectively be the European Union and would set the terms of economic and fiscal policy and even business regulatory policy for the European Union as a whole. And you can imagine, therefore, in the longer term, British membership coming into question as its interests diverge from the core of the European Union. But I do think Ed Balls is right that the ultimate solution to the euro crisis is some kind of fiscal harmony That won't happen for a long time.
It wouldn't involve us.
It wouldn't involve us, and it would be incredibly difficult even for the existing Euro countries to get there, but it is the most plausible.
What's your take on it, then? I've got a final word from Mr. Bowles.
I think people are very depressed by the lack of political leadership. Where Ed Balls is right is people need unity of purpose. They're not getting that. It doesn't reassure the markets, and we've got a position...
Do you really think the
where
British could make a difference?
I don't think they could make a huge difference, but people would listen if the Conservative Party weren't split down the middle on this. You've got a potential of 100 Tory MPs rebelling on Monday.
There'll be quite a few Labour MPs as well.
Absolutely, and that sends out a very, very bad message, and it's echoed across Europe. The lack of political leadership in this area is woeful.
I want to come back finally, because it is an issue which will come up to the debate on Monday, and it is not a party political point I'd like you to comment on. I just come back to what I've said. It seems to me that if the Eurozone does go down the route of fiscal integration and economic harmony, and we're not part of that, whatever British politicians say, that will enforce a redefinition of our relationship with the EU. Can I just get a final reaction to that?
That is right, and it's a huge challenge for our generation. But I have to say, millions of jobs and investment in our country depends upon our access to that wider EU market.
Sure, but we'll always have that. That's all covered by WTO rules, Mr. Bowles. You know that as well as I do.
But you also know that the integration of the single market in financial services, for example, goes way beyond the WTO. We're negotiating those things at the moment, and Britain is not punching its weight. I have to say, Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, all of them would have been demanding to be at this summit, getting it sorted out. David Cameron has walked away. That is not in our national interest. I want us to be not in the euro, but in the debates. We've got to shape it so we keep the jobs and investment in Britain.
All right. Well, I hope we let you shape it a little bit today. Ed Bowles, thanks for joining us from Sheffield.